can begin with this session. So welcome everybody to this very exciting session about maps, disputes, wars, and surveillance that will bring us from the 17th to the 18th and to the 20th century. So we will have three speakers today: Junia Furtado, Lucía, Rodríguez, Arrillaga, and Sebastian, Díaz, Angel. So our first presenter today is Junia Furtado from Universidad General do Minas Gerais in Brazil. Junia holds a PhD in social history from Universidad de São Paulo, and she has been visiting scholars in many European and North American universities, and you probably all know her. And she published several books on the history of Brazilian cartography that received a warm welcome from the academic community. So Junia will bring us to the 17th century today with a talk entitled "The War of Salvador City in a New Cartographical Perspective: The Dutch and Luso-Spanish Disputes in Maps." So please, Junia, if you want to begin your talk.
Okay, I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Okay, wait a moment, it's started in the wrong place. Okay. So thank you. I'm going to present one article that I have been written. This paper analyzes two maps that portray the war between the Portuguese and the Dutch between 1624 and 1625 for the conquest of Salvador City, then the capital of Brazil, located in the northwest. The first map of Dutch origin is authored by Vischer and Gerritsen and published in Amsterdam in 1624. A so-called news map, it depicts the seizure of the city by the naval and military forces of the Dutch West Indian Companies, VIC, on May 1624. The second, of Portuguese origin, is designed by João Teixeira Albernaz I, or the Elder, and made in 1631. It represents the expulsion of the Dutch from the city by the military force dispatched by the Luso-Spanish crown in an offensive that became known as the Journey of the Vassals, which culminated on March 1625 with the withdrawal of the Dutch and the restitution of the city by the Luso-Spaniards. Unusually, in an uncritical way, the first map is used by historians to illustrate with images the captures of the city by the Dutch and the second of their expulsion. On an opposite way, in a critical perspective, in which maps are understood as powerful visual political weapons, the purpose of this paper is to compare the two maps to reveal the distinct messages that both sought to build about the Salvador War to a larger public audience, an important episode of the conquest of the sugar area of Brazil by the Dutch. Vischer and Gerritsen's map is a black-white printed map, which means that thousands of copies were made to be spread all around. It's a publication that displays both text and image, a news map that needs to be understood as a tool to advertise the VIC conquests in South America in order to spread the news and attract investors for the enterprise. In fact, the quick triumph had an enormous impact in Europe. It was VIC's first attack and also the first time that Habsburg Spain had suffered a major defeat in the Eastern Hemisphere. And everything is there to highlight this triumph. The map presents the city according to the Dutch world's view and pictorial framing. As in a painting, the city is seen from the sea from where the invaders arrive and rests placid on the hill in an almost pastoral and idyllic perspective. Water became an important element of identity in the Low Countries, often represented in a picture way. The urban grid is ordered. Its modern or important equipment are highlighted, facilitating the life of the inhabitants, like number 13 that shows the ingenious vertical elevator that carried the goods uphill, and the numbers 22 that presents the 2 clean water sources that supply the city. The textual explanation detailed the various episodes of the conquest that took only 2 days, and the map displays the sequence of events in a single image, which begin at the sea, reach the beach, and ascend the hill to enter the city. All the main locations of the battle, 13 out of 24, and the main buildings of the city, 11, are numbered and named and explained in the caption, all from the point of view and interest of the Dutch. Not by chance, the map shows in the first scene the impressive Dutch Navy forces with the 26 ships entering the bay. Framing them were the Portuguese defensive bastions that protected it. All 6 forts were designed, including the newly constructed sea forts built in order to defend the lower city. It intended to highlight the superiority and the heroism of the Dutch forces in opposition to the Luso-Spanish Brazilian feebleness, as the Dutch forces were able to conquer the city within 48 hours that has no defense walls, like here in the image below, showing the population running the city, or doesn't show them at all. The map must be read as an official version of the events. The aim was to display a truthful account and image of the event and of the city in order to the representation became reliable. Reality here as a guarantee of truth to be spread all around lower countries and Europe. But it was not so realistic. So some aspects were highlighted and others were suppressed. The bay was drawn much smaller than it really is, so the local defensive bastions lie much closer to the fleet, highlighting the audacity and the naval capacity of the invaders and the weakness of the defense. Brazil, and especially Salvador da Bahia, were presented in the captures as a land of uncountable treasures and wealth, and among the commodities that were immediately confiscated, there was sugar. Number 10s show the warehouse where they found tons of sugar box, so profits are what can be expected. Let's go to the second map. It's a manuscript map made by commission of one of the king's noble. Its purpose is also to glorify, but glorify in this case having a very different meaning. It was not to glorify only the Habsburg crown and their vassals' heroism and victory. Victory here having a very different meaning, reinforcing the absolute monarch's power, and Albernaz, not by chance, present the moment of its victory. So the city is the same. There is the battle. One presents the defeat of the Portuguese, now the defeat of the Dutch. Albernaz descended from a long line, being a cosmographer of the king. In the map, he partially adopts the maritime perspective of the Dutch. Along with it, a bird-eye perspective of the cities and the surroundings are presented, giving to the land much more importance. The representation of the new Dutch walls that you can see here, now protecting the city, and a recent built ditch in blue that surrounded the city along with their artillery calls attention to the importance that the crown of the crown reconquest. At the same time, displayed the Dutch's effort reshaping the city and the Portuguese attempt to elude it, as the new ditch was presented, is written here, hortas, which means vegetable garden, not only altering but subverting the meaning and the use of this water space. The wider bay, which corresponds more to reality, highlights the impressive Luso-Spanish-Brazilian fleet that is divided into Spanish and Portuguese ships, disappearing with the 5 Brazilian ships that joined the fleet. Working under the Habsburg crown, Albernaz emphasized the role played by the Spanish ships, while in reality the Portuguese vessels accounted for 8% of the fleet. Unlike the Dutch map, the soldiers are not represented. Especially it omits the Indians and the Luso-Brazilian men who attacked from inland. The map represented the Luso-Castilian artillery, number 7, the Portuguese bastions, number 5, and their ones positioned by the Italians, mercenary Italians that surrounded the city, number 11, revealing the recruitment of mercenary soldiers. In that sense, the map presents itself as an exaltation of the Iberian Union and the Habsburg crown, and in opposite direction, completely erased the Brazilian habitants' role. The presence of the Dutch fleet anchored in the harbor, the squadron that came in helping the enemy, and their batteries placed along the city walls, highlights the strength of the enemies and the bravery of the reconquerors. Despite that, there is a more important message underneath it. That was how the enemies desacralized and profaned the territory, which justifies its reconquest, as explained in the caption that shows all the sacred territories where the Dutch transformed in military places. In the caption, the readers are informed that on the beach, the Dutch had built a lot of artillery, number 2. In the inland, took the houses of the king, number 16, in order to house their governors, and outside the walls, they destroyed some local houses. The intention is to show that they took places of war, of power, and of the local people, now regained by the brave vassals. To get worse, some days after the conquest the year before, in an act of heresy, the Dutch turned many religious buildings, being then built of stone and lime, in defensive bastions. Number 12 represents the church and school of the Jesuits, where the enemy placed 4 pieces of artillery that did us much damage. Now I'm quoting the caption. The 13, so this is the 12. The 13 is the cathedral, where in front of it is still a sacred soil. Quoting, they had 3 pieces that hurt us and made it a mosque. 14 is the Church of San Francisco, where the enemies had their warehouses. The Church of the Holy Mary of Help, number 15, was transformed into a cellar of wines for the enemies. And in the Church of the Island, number 17, the enemies made their observations. On the other hand, the artillery positioned by the Luso-Castilian forces in sacred places, as the monastery of Carmel, number 10, and San Bento, and the old church of St. Anthony, for the Portuguese didn't profanate them. In this way, Albernaz's map reveals that to the Luso-Spanish Brazilian, Salvador was not only a military battle against the Dutch enemies and against between the Dutch enemies and the Habsburg crown, but foremost a war between Catholicism and Protestantism, or between religion and heresy, and also between republic and monarchy. And the map was a powerful visual political weapon that displayed the message of the crowns and vassals' victory, but exalts the Iberian sovereigns as the true representatives of God on earth. On the opposite way, Vischer and Gerritsen's map shows the city as a Dutch general states and Vic's conquest in order to, in a more pagan way, attract investors, glorifying the economy enterprise, and the ascending of the local bourgeoisie of the Low Countries in their conquest of the world's market. Thank you. Kentan, you have to turn on your sound.
Yes, sorry. So, thank you very much, Junia, for this very interesting and detailed analysis of those two maps. If we have time, we will take question later on, if it's okay for everybody. And yes, it's time now to welcome our second speaker, Lucía Rodríguez Arrillaga. So Lucía is a PhD student in social history at University of São Paulo, and she is also a teacher and researcher at the Department of American History of Universidad de la República in Uruguay. Today, she'll give us a talk inspired from her ongoing doctoral thesis, Passionate Physiographies, Territory and Patriotism at the Crossroads of the Iberian Empires, the Plate region between 1750 and 1810. And her talk is entitled Time Throughout Space, the Cartography of the Boundary Demarcation Commissions of the Rio de la Plata region as Horizons of Expectations. Please, so Lucía, go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good night, everyone. I would like to thank the committee for this opportunity to present part of my PhD thesis in progress. In my thesis, when contrasting the content of the documents produced by the members of the Boundary Demarcation Commission sent by Spain and Portugal to the Rio de la Plata region during the second half of the 18th century, more than a diagnosis of the effective occupation of these disputed areas, these cartographic projections can be considered prophetic. This is due to the fact that these maps and documents reveal the desire to transform those lands, like the document says, or admirable conquest, into territories, understood as homogeneous areas belonging exclusively to the jurisdiction of the respective monarchy. First of all, I would like to introduce the maps. Both maps that I will be referred here are manuscripts and were produced after the signing of a new boundary treaty in 1777 between Spain and Portugal. The first one is a chart of the captaincy of Rio Grande de Sao Pedro and its surroundings up to the Rio de la Plata in 1781 by the Portuguese military engineer Francisco João Rocio. In the same year, he also wrote his Compendium of News from Rio Grande de Sao Pedro, in which he directly references these maps and which offers a sort of explanation of its content. The second one is the spherical map of the northern provinces of the Rio de la Plata. Data gathering was carried out until 1796 by the geographer of the Second Commission, pilot Andrés de Ollarvide. Besides, like Rocio, Ollarvide wrote a diary of his task, geographic memory of the trips made from Buenos Aires to Salto Grande del Paraná by the first and second demarcation parties in South America. Both maps refer to the same geographical space, the one comprised between the Rio de la Plata with Buenos Aires and Montevideo in its two banks, and Asunción and Rio Grande del Sur with some eastward shift in the case of the Portuguese maps, or towards the west in the case of the Spanish ones. They were elaborated using the most advanced technology at the time, not only for scientific reasons, but also to use them for imperial purposes. The first one was made before the demarcatory task, and the second one when the majority of those tasks had been performed. That is why in the compilation by Orsarvide, there is special care in pointing out in which places the length measurements were carried out jointly between Portuguese and Spanish commissioners, a type of measurement that, due to the amount of work it required, was only done for some base points, which will later serve as a reference when compiling various regional maps in the same plans, in the same maps. And here, my argument. The possibility of measuring time in space, or what is the same, the possibility of using precision tools to measure the time spent in the journeys, was what allowed the elaboration of these modern cartographies. The history of cartography has been pointing out the need to analyze maps together with the memoirs that often accompany them for a long time. I now intend to use those memoirs not only to extract information about the process of making the maps and keys to read it. Rather, I also propose to use the heuristics tools of conceptual history to carry out this interlocution. Thus, Rainer Koselleck's methodology would propose the analysis of conceptual changes as indicators of new ways of experiencing temporality becomes extremely useful. It is the awareness the protagonists have of the distance between their own experiences and their expectation for the future what determines, in Koselleck's analysis, the temporal experience of this protagonist. The aim of this communication is to determine to what extent the new ways of experiencing time, typical of the 18th century, reveal which was the horizon of expectation that Iberian officials had. The interpretation is novel because instead of focusing in the disputes they faced, that is the focus of this session, between Portuguese, Spanish, and indigenous people, which have already been studied by historiography, we want to position the Rio de la Plata mapping process in broader global dynamics, such as the changes that took place during the mid-18th century regarding the ways of experimenting and measuring time, which caused expectation and the possibility of mapping different parts of the globe. The visual power of both maps on a large scale creates a certain illusions of homogeneity, I think. However, to refer to the area subject to mapping, in several reports the terms land and terrain were used interchangeably, or at times the patrimonial term domain was also chosen. But only to a lesser extent the word territory was used. The fluidity with which different words were used is an indicator that they were not yet considered territories, and that their transformation into a space of exclusive jurisdiction was part of the horizon of expectation of those who took part in that process. This happened because in Koselleckian terms, a temporalization of the word territory is taking place. But also it is possible to notice certain simultaneity of the anachronistic, because one can find the word territory used with different meanings to refer to the area of jurisdiction of a city or a military or ecclesiastic ecclesiastical authority, like traditionally, and with a new sense, to refer to the space of development of a more extensive political community, which could have, as was the case of the Iberian monarchies, multi-continental dimensions. Although the transformation that the concept of territory underwent due to the bordering discussion was pointed out by Beatriz Bueno, based on the analysis of Portuguese historical dictionaries, the reflection upon the category territory, even in a diachronic key, has mainly come from historical geography. This has been the case from the traditional study of Gottman to the more contemporary work of David Delany or that of Stuart Eldon, who has drawn attention to the fact that not even conceptual history had explicitly dealt with the historical configuration of the concept of territory and the cluster of concepts associated with it. Although in this communication it's not possible to make a detailed presentation of the results, we will talk over some paragraphs from the Rocio and Ocharvide memoirs like examples. In his compendium of news, Rocio explicitly acknowledged the discontinuity of the occupation of such spaces, and always used words such as terrains, lands, and domains. In this example, for example, is possible to see that. All of the aforementioned can be better understood, say Rocio, by looking at the map that I created in the best way and regularity that was possible for me of these terrains. From the Rio de la Plata to the Salto Grande del Paraná, in which all the better known mountains, rivers, and passages are indicated. Since the central terrain, again, to which I have just exposed in this relation, is almost unknown around the boundary, and all wooded and inhabited by wild and unfaithful nation, as well as poisonous and ferocious animals. None of these terrains can be traveled without great precautions. Rocio explicitly recognized that the central terrain was not only not controlled by European powers, but also that it was not fully known. However, on the map he created, where according to him you could better see everything that was explained in the compendium, the presence of the wild nation is silenced, thus creating the illusion of homogeneity that we were previously talking about. The fact that Rocio did not use the word territory properly in his compendium should not surprise us, because among Portuguese officials its use was less frequent than among the Spanish, and only after the signing and circulation of the Treaty of 1777 a certain popularization in the use of the term can be found. Let's now have a look at the case of Ocharvide, who used the word territory only in 2 cases in his geographic memoirs, to refer to the term or scope of his demarcation commissions, and to refer to the practice of smuggling from Portuguese people in Spanish territory. In fact, he chose the words land, terrain, and domain much more often. In this extract, Ocharvide described the technological difficulties faced by the demarcation parties when measuring time in space, a practice that I believe was very important in the configuration of the experiences of temporality of those who participated in that demarcation. He said, although the particular distances to be measured in these spaces by using a watch and the horse's pace are themselves so variable and imprecise due to the difficulty of finding one of known world, and although it may be achieved after repeated tests on a measured terrain, as the instability of the day on the day itself remain, affecting flow for the animal and even for the person controlling it, somehow these differences in the path will be prevented with the use of the latitudes, the different of latitudes that were better known. In this case, the word terrain was used to indicate the area where measurements had to be carried out in order to overcome these technical difficulties. On the other hand, if we think of the space of experiences involving the creation of these maps, we must consider that both Rossi and Ocharvide had Atlantic biographies, and that their trajectory show that for the making of the maps and memoirs, having traveled around the area was as important as returning to the peninsula to work with all the materials available in Lisbon, as was the case of Rossio between 1779 to 1781, or Madrid, as was the case of Ocharvide in 1798. This has probably provided them with very particular perception and time space experiences that they share with some peninsular actors as well as some locals. It is not coincidental that both distanced themselves from the way in which the common inhabitant of the Rio de la Plata perceived their own reality, and explicitly indicated the possibility of turning those spaces into something else through the mapping process itself and through the introduction of change for its reorganization. In this example of Rossio from the compendium, he said, "From all the aforementioned, it can very well be inferred that a population raised with this prejudice or raised in a manner in which, according to their inclination and nature, generally everyone understands that this is not practicable to change or improve, it will be difficult to reduce it to a better shape, and that this country, even taking care of its improvements and population, cannot in a few years or perhaps centuries, without extraordinary and risky determination to be able to have and supply the strength that such an extensive boundary requires." As conclusion, this trans-imperial knowledge about the Rio de la Plata that was carried out by the commissioners in charge of demarcation at the service of their respective monarchies, but in collaboration with local elites, was the unexpected result of the arduous effort of imperial patriotism. The horizon of expectation of this collaboration between subjects from multi-continental monarchies was to transform those spaces into the homogeneous territories they still weren't. Many times it has been claimed that boundary treaties or even the discourses derived from cartography and memoirs had no impact on the social life of these spaces. Instead, we are interested in showing the performative effect these discourses had on the conditions of occupation of these spaces and their transformation into territories. It was the better delimitation, both reflectively and practically, of those spaces, the factor that in the mid-term ended up making the permanence of the indigenous people who inhabited them impossible. This happened because, in fact, as Elden has said, creating territories is essentially an act of violence and exclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucía, for this great presentation. Well, I already have few questions on the chat, but just to remind you to everybody that if you have questions, you send it to me via the chat in private message, and then I will ask it for you. Okay, so thank you again, Lucía. Thanks a lot. So our next speaker is Sebastian Díaz Angel. Sebastian, okay, so I don't know if you are able to turn on your video, but at least you should turn on your microphone, Sebastian. So Sebastian is from Colombia, and he will go for a presentation on lobbying for real-time mappings, cartographic ideologies, and surveillance technologies for counterinsurgency operations in the Third War during the 1960s. So this is part of his PhD, of his ongoing PhD at Cornell University, and his dissertation focuses on geographical engineering development programs in Latin America during the Cold War, combining history of cartography, sciences and technology studies, environmental history, and digital humanities. So Sebastian, now it's your turn for your presentation, please.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you turn on your video, or it's not possible?
So I tried, but my internet is not that good. So I think that if I turn it on, I will lose audio. So
okay, super fine.
Okay, thank you all to all the people attending this session and to the organizers of the symposium. I want to stress that my paper is not about some specific map or group of maps. Rather, it is about an idea of mapping, instant mappings. In the mid-60s, this idea was promoted by defense contractors aimed to sell the US government and some allied underdeveloped countries a series of new technologies packed in reconverted aircrafts to deliver almost real-time military maps to counterinsurgency troops in the ground engaged mostly in tropical jungle warfare. My presentation aims today, is questioning and discussing some preliminary arguments about the intertwined histories, politics, business, geographies, infrastructures, technologies, and ideologies of the 60s to survey and map the tropics from the airs in order to fight communist insurgency. Sorry, can you see my slide moving or not? Oh,
no.
Yeah, okay. Let me start recalling an article from Business Week from May 23, 1964, and entitled Search for New Plane. According to this article, the US Department of Defense was struggling to adapt its oldest planes for guerrilla fighting in Vietnam. It was also demanding the production of an aircraft better suited for hit and run type of warfare. How effective are American weapons in guerrilla types of wars of liberation? Is America air power suited for unconventional wars in remote jungles and mountains by an enemy who hits and runs in small bands and who relies heavily on ambush and infiltration? The article asked. The simple answer to that question, according to the magazine, was that the US didn't have a plane designed specifically for counterinsurgency operations. The need is for a lightweight, easily maintained, fairly slow plane that can take off from primitive runaways, loiter over enemy territory for long periods, and perform a variety of missions, state the article, ranging from close air support and armed reconnaissance to helicopter escort, target marking, and battlefield illumination. In addition, the article highlighted in a rather prejudiced tone, the plane must be easy to operate for the people who will use it, Asians, Africans, Latin Americans, likely to be confronted with communist-inspired guerrilla warfare. The article implied, thus, that just as the airplanes required to be able to take off and perform in primitive environments, they equally needed to be repaired and operated by somehow unsophisticated, underdeveloped third world people. Anyway, as the article notes, 9 companies submitted proposals in the counterinsurgency aircraft competition to develop a prototype of a totally new plane design specifically for counterinsurgency work, or to improve the adaptation and conversion of existing aircrafts to COIN, counterinsurgency airplanes. So modified A-26 bombers, as the one you see now, used in the World War II, or converted North American T-28 Trojans, originally used as trainer aircraft, were frequently used in the US military and CIA interventions in the Third World, in the decolonization wars of Africa by European powers, and in guerrilla operations by underdeveloped countries. My focus today is on one project by a private think tank, not by an air company. This think tank, named the Hudson Institute, proposed to convert outmoded civilian aircrafts, not military aircraft, in particular the Constellation aircraft, into counterinsurgency aircraft. Oops. The project focused on the concept of flying tanks, as I will examine in a few minutes, and on instant mapping flights, aircrafts, versions of the aircraft. So two versions. But let me explain first why this aircraft. So the Constellation aircraft in the 60s was already an old plane upgraded by the jet airlines. So there were more than 150 obsolete aircrafts in the US, and they seemed to be perfect for long range missions. There were a lot of pilots and people to repair them, and mainly they were cheap. So in today's dollars, they will cost a very small portion of their original price, as you can see there. So these were very suited aircrafts, civilian aircrafts, to be transformed into military aircrafts. And let me also highlight briefly what is Hudson Institute. Or what was the Hudson Institute at the time. So it was a non-profit American think tank founded in '61 in New York by controversial futurist, military strategist, and system theorist Herman Kahn, a former figure of the Rand Corporation. And during the 60s, this institute worked mainly as a research contractor for the Department of Defense. So the institute wasn't selling airplanes and technology, as in the case we saw before. It was rather selling papers, policy concepts, and ideas about national security and international order. During the Q&A session, I will be happy to explain more about it. Anyway, I need to speed up. And so the Hudson Institute COIN project was named Counterinsurgency Transport Aircraft Conversion, CTAC. As I mentioned, its objective was to convert Constellation aircrafts into two complementary types of COIN. The first, the type, the CTAC-1, or heavy weapon platform, or the flying tank, would be essentially a powerful weapon platform armed with 10 Vulcan M16 automatic machine guns. You can see somehow how it should look inside. The second air type, the CTAC-2, the airborne photoreconnaissance intelligence platform, or instant mapping aircraft, would essentially be reserved for reconnaissance, mapping, and surveillance missions. Until then, photo intelligence required many hours of work, or even days, by different teams of technicians and professionals in aircraft and in land facilities before the results could be even forwarded to the area of military operations and used there by ground forces. The normal processes involved not only photo recognition flights, in which specialized crews took aerial photographs of the area of operation, but depended highly on the fact that photographic film reels had to return to land in facilities to be developed, photo-interpreted, glosed, transposed into maps with diverse communications and coding systems, and ultimately sent to the final users, sometimes by air delivery. The CITAC promoters promised to assemble in one flying package aerophotography capacity, film processing, photo interpretation, preparation of positive transparent overlays printed to scale 1/25,000, and aerial delivery of real-time maps and data to the very final users, the counterinsurgency forces in the ground, all in minutes. So how to deliver the maps to ground forces in the jungle was a critical aspect of the whole concept. And the rope trick that you see described here, technique, was crucial to the Houston Institute. So all the printing of the maps would be done in the aircraft, as well as all the previous processes. And so the bottleneck was how to deliver them to. So all this concept was integral. And actually, the promoters of the project, according to them, the whole project and the rope trick occurred to them during exploratory and reconnaissance flights in the Chocó area of Colombia, a very jungle, humid region, while carrying their river studies for the Ministry of Public Works of that country in that same year of 1965. So here is where this CITAC project starts to be for me very relevant, I believe, taking into account all I've been trying to pack also. So I believe this is interesting for the history of cartography for many reasons, because it's a US history where US is central to the history, but it's not the central protagonist, because there's other protagonists in countries like Colombia, etc. There's military, there's engineers, there are many actors there, but also this is where I must confess, I also start to have much more questions than answers. So the plan was that these two types of coin aircraft able to perform the rope trick should be used simultaneously in order that they could be committed in action together and explore the tactical possibilities of their complementary and mutually supporting roles. That is, of mapping, surveying, targeting, shooting, and delivering intelligence data to troops in the ground to finish the work. All of this from the air. In front of you is an abstract, an extract of a working paper by the Hudson Institute, where we can see that the initial idea was a kind of CITAC 1.5, combining both roles, mapping and shooting. This hybrid version was to be equipped with a device for metal detection, originally developed for geological mapping, and capable to find from the air a metal plate buried under 18 inches of sand, which could be adapted to monitor, search, and destroy enemy ground operations, according to Hudson Institute staff. With 20 of these metal detecting devices on wings and fuselage, the promoters stated, the converted aircraft could be used to map a 1-mile wide swamp, providing us with detailed information on the metals located in the area, flying in lazy circles of an elevation of around 1,000 feet, acting as an armored combat patrol with an ability to fire at locations where significant metal has been identified. And the quote I'm putting here is also that it should be also possible, they note, to slave, that's the term, to slave some of the firepower of the aircraft to the metal detection device so that they can be brought to being automatically on metal indicated or metal in movement. That is a form of automatic blind shooting cartographic system, if the expression is allowed. So, is the Houston Institute project a kind of technological milestone in the automation of cartographic blind shooting bombing systems? Or is it just another chapter in the ideology of the map, the singular record of geographic reality accessible from Apollo's eyes, to use a Crossgrove expression? Is the documental corpus of the CITAC project a testimony of the actual materialization of instant mapping or something close to that for counterinsurgency warfare? Or is it rather a relic of a technological illusion, of a technocratic dream to defeat from airplanes insurgency and communism in the tropics? I still don't have any answer to these and other related questions. I'm just starting. This is a very new subject for me. It is important to highlight that the Houston Institute researchers were not military, nor cartographers, nor aircraft pilots or builders. They were technocrats from the military industrial complex. Yes, in a way they were warrior engineers, warrior physicists, warrior economists, warrior political scientists, etc. And they were cherry picking different technologies, systems, devices, and techniques, probably with lots of technocratic ideological glue, if you may allow me that expression, in order to assemble an aerophoto reconnaissance intelligence platform or instant mapping aircraft that should work intimately with this heavy shooting flying tank. What I am sure is that in a way this project can help us to understand, if I continue my research in this way, about an epistemological level, a geoepistemological level, to use William Ranking's notion, on the way on how tropical insurgent lowlands were to be understood, dominated, mapped, tamed, controlled. In the few minutes remaining I have, please let me know when I'm done out of time, I am going to show in a rather impressionistic way some of the documents that contain artifacts, processes, technologies, systems, devices, techniques that the Houston Institute attempted to assemble for this instant mapping project. I still don't know if the idea was, if the concept actually worked, or if it even could work, or how it was received by the Department of Defense. As I mentioned before, and you see now the blueprint of this aircraft, the aircraft was conceived of capable of day and night photography, rapid film processing, photo interpretation, preparation of positive, etc. So according to its promoters, the technology required to be installed in the aircraft would include communication equipment, observation ports, binocular visual aids for daily observations, cameras array for day and night photography, photo processing, photo interpreting. In addition, low light level television would permit twilight and nighttime surveillance, the promoter said. Videotape recording capability and TV relay tape on ground stations in real time frames should also be possible. So this is kind of the material I found in this National Defense University archives, where I was studying the Houston Institute papers for my project on development, cartography, infrastructure, technology, and counterinsurgency. And if I still have a few minutes, you will tell me, please cut me when I'm done.
Yeah, Sebastian, if we want to have the time for
okay.
At least one or two questions, I think it's if you
time
can
to finish?
conclude that will be great.
Thank you. So all these documents that I just show you a little about them, I just pass into my last slide, sorry. Explore this business of real-time mapping for counterinsurgency operations. I will continue to examine a corpus of documents produced by contractors lobbying for the instant mapping aircraft. In doing so, I will start to analyze the promotion of new mapping technologies, products, services, as well as cartographic imaginaries and ideologies they developed and mobilized to convince potential clients, users, and consumers for real-time counterinsurgency mappings. The instant mapping project approach today deals with US military industrial complex, in particular with the business of remote area conflict. But as I will show in my broader dissertation on the relationship between cartography, counterinsurgency, infrastructure, and development projects in Latin America, this was a project that had a lot of enthusiasm beyond the US central role in this history. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for your presentation. I'm very sorry, but it's almost 7 here in France, so I think we won't have any time for more questions. But I'm sure you will meet again in another room, and you can ask questions in private to our colleagues. So once again, thank you very much for all attendees and for all the presenters for this great session today. And well, I welcome you to join the ISHMap general meeting that will happen now. Well, ISHMap members, of course, but it's open to everybody. So so please join us at the meeting. Thank you again, and see you later.